I was in a relationship with Thaddeus for 7 years, but after he was arrested and sent to prison, I decided to leave him and start a new life with his best friend. After Thaddeus was released from prison, he made a comeback and used every means possible to force me to marry him. Everyone outside knew he claimed to love me, but no one knew the truth. After we married, he brought different women home every night. Even my own sister wasn't spared. This was the price he paid for betraying me. However, what he doesn't know is that to clear his name, I risked my life by infiltrating a gang and traded a kidney and half my liver for crucial evidence. Unfortunately, I don't have much time left. Isolde, are you really going to schedule the euthanasia procedure for next month and sign the organ donation form? I'm certain, Aloan Holloway said, lowering her head to look at the test results with terrible readings, her voice filled with resignation. If this continues, it's truly a waste of resources. Her body's organs have already irreversibly deteriorated, and she has at most a year left, rather than spend the remaining days doing nothing. It's better to choose a dignified way to leave, so she can still contribute something to society. Aloan left the hospital under the doctor's sighing gaze. Upon returning home, she opened the door and immediately heard suggestive breathing coming from the bedroom. Aloan's face grew even paler. She hid the test results, leaned against the bedroom door, and listened to the sounds inside, her nails unintentionally digging into her flesh. She couldn't remember how many women Thaddeus Whitfield had brought home. In the 2 years since their marriage, Thaddeus had brought home a different woman every day, engaging in intimate acts in front of her, even refusing to let her leave the room. After an hour, the sounds inside gradually faded away. Thaddeus emerged from the bedroom, saw Aloan leaning against the door, and coldly asked, "What are you still standing there for?" Isolde Holloway is thirsty, go get her a glass of water. Aloan's heart skipped a beat, almost convinced she had heard incorrectly. Isolde, she hurried to the bedroom door and looked at the woman on the bed. The woman who looked so much like her, Isolde Holloway, lay helplessly on the bed, wearing Aloan's silk nightgown, now torn and tattered. Aloan's hands trembled slightly. She turned around, her eyes red, and looked at Thaddeus. "How could you do this? Isolde is my younger sister. How could you do this?" Thaddeus grabbed Aloan's wrist and pressed it against the wall. His eyes filled with mockery. "So what? Oh, right. She's your last remaining relative. Being betrayed by the person you trusted most must feel awful, right?" Thaddeus spoke coldly, a shadow of darkness flashing in his eyes. "Aloan, you deserve everything that's happening to you." Aloan closed her eyes, a bitter taste rising in her throat. She and Thaddeus had grown up together, their bond deep and strong. They had been in love for 7 years and had planned to marry, but on the eve of their wedding, the hospital Thaddeus managed was exposed for organ trafficking, and as the main culprit, he was arrested. In an instant, Thaddeus went from a promising young man to a prisoner. He sent Aloan numerous messages and made countless calls, trying to explain himself and assure her that he would soon be cleared of all charges and released. Yet, at the very moment when he needed her support the most, she chose to break up with him and officially start a relationship with his best friend, although Thaddeus remained calm during his indictment and arrest. Hearing this news caused him to break down completely. He even threatened suicide to the police, kneeling on the ground begging them to let him see Aloan. He was too hard on himself and ended up in the hospital due to excessive blood loss. But the news he received was that Aloan had already left the country with her boyfriend. Thaddeus refused to believe Aloan could be so heartless. He borrowed someone else's phone and called her repeatedly, but the calls went unanswered. Despite his condition, Thaddeus insisted on going to the airport to find her, but collapsed on the way. Aloan left without a word. From that moment on, Thaddeus harbored deep resentment toward her. This resentment was so intense that after he was released from prison, he went to great lengths to marry her, yet he treated her harshly every night. What he didn't know was that Aloan had risked her life to find an organ trafficking ring through his friends, trading one of her kidneys and half of her liver for the crucial evidence needed to clear his name. Aloan's silence made Thaddeus even angrier. He pushed her away, disgustedly wiping his hands on a piece of paper where he had touched her. "What are you staring at? Isolde is waiting for your water." Aloan hurriedly walked to the kitchen, poured a cup of warm water, and placed it on the bedside table in the bedroom, her hands still trembling slightly. "Thank you, sister." Isolde's voice was hoarse but gentle. "I'll leave you now. Thaddeus told me to move in with him. We're all family, you don't mind, do you? Eloan stopped turning around and asked, have you all lost your minds? Isolde heard this and grew angry, raising her voice suddenly. Yes, I've gone mad. You've always been better than me and more loved by our family. No one in this family cares about me. Isolde clutched the bedsheet tightly, thinking to herself, only Thaddeus' brother always remembers to care about me. But he just loves you even after being betrayed. He still only wants to be with you? Isolde said jealously. What gives you the right? Eloan smiled bitterly. So you're willing to degrade yourself and rely on your brother-in-law. If it weren't for me, it would be someone else. Isolde sat up, took Eloan's hand and softened her tone. Sister, the hospital called me. I know you don't have much time left. Rather than letting those girls take Mrs. Whitfield's place, let me take care of Thaddeus. Sister, I've never competed with you for anything my whole life. This time, can you let me have him, please? Eloan shook her head. You don't need me to give you anything. Isolde's expression changed, but Eloan's next words calmed her slightly. He hates me so much. What trouble could I possibly cause you? Isolde handed the water cup to Eloan and whispered, Sister, can you help me one more time? Eloan suddenly felt an ominous premonition and instinctively tried to pull her hand back, but Isolde suddenly exerted force, splashing the entire cup of water onto her own face. At the same time, she shouted, Ah, don't. Thaddeus rushed into the room and saw Eloan holding the cup by the bedside, with a soaking wet Isolde in front of her. Looking very pitiful. Eloan, what are you doing? Thaddeus hugged Isolde tightly and glared at Eloan with displeasure. Isolde is your own sister? Isolde sobbed softly in his arms. Thaddeus, don't blame my sister. She was just caught off guard. How could you be so foolish? She did that to you, and you're still defending her. Thaddeus lowered his head and spoke gently. Don't worry, I'm here. No one will bully you. Eloan snapped out of her daze and looked at the loving couple before her, feeling a chill in her heart. She turned and left, pushing that scene out of her mind. That night, Thaddeus and Isolde seemed to deliberately make Eloan feel uneasy, creating a lot of noise. Isolde, I love you so much, Thaddeus said. I love you too, Thaddeus, she replied. Eloan, lying in the next room, bit her lip tightly and pulled the blanket over her head. They had once lain in the same bed like this before, and his voice had been just as gentle then. They had once held each other tightly, dreaming of a future where they would grow old together and have children and grandchildren. But time had passed, and those beautiful fantasies had all turned into bubbles, bursting in an instant. Thinking of this, Eloan couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness, and tears streamed down her cheeks. The next morning, Eloan had barely slept at all and woke up with dark circles under her eyes. She sat at the dining table, eating her porridge alone, completely oblivious to the sweet interaction between the two people across from her. Thaddeus, this bread tastes great. Try some. Isolde spread jam on the bread and fed it to Thaddeus. Thaddeus smiled as he took the bread and savored it slowly. This scene caused Eloan a pang of heartache. But before long, her stomach began to ache intensely, and as the pain worsened, cold sweat broke out on her forehead. What's wrong? Thaddeus frowned across the table. Eloan tried to speak, but no words came out. Then she vomited a mouthful of bright red blood, feeling dizzy and on the verge of fainting. Eloan. Thaddeus's expression changed instantly. He jumped up and said, I'll take you to the hospital right away. Hold on. At that moment, his face was filled with anxiety and concern, reminding Eloan of something that had happened years ago. Back then, even if she had just a common cold and a fever, he would have been so worried he would have done anything to take her place. Thinking of this, a soft spot in Eloan's heart was gently touched, but the feeling quickly faded. Isolde smiled slightly, stood up, and said, Thaddeus, don't worry. I just found a blood bag in the bathroom this morning. Isolde pulled out an empty, transparent blood bag from her pocket. Thaddeus's expression turned grim. Sister, if I'm not mistaken, the blood you just vomited was from this blood bag. Wasn't it? You're trying to make Thaddeus feel sorry for you, aren't you? She looked at Eloan with a pained expression on her face. Is this fake? Are you lying to me? Thaddeus silently withdrew his hand, stood there, and glared at Eloan with a cold stare. Don't you really understand? Eloan forced herself to ignore the discomfort in her heart, wiped her mouth lightly, and said, Of course it's fake. I didn't expect you to believe such a trick. You really make me feel uncomfortable. Eloan saw the disgust in his eyes and forced a smile. Then I'll take your blessing, Isolde, who was standing nearby. quickly grabbed Thaddeus's arm and said gently, "Thaddeus, don't be angry with your sister. Don't make yourself uncomfortable. The weather is nice today. Shall we go out for a walk together?" Thaddeus looked at Isolde, and his expression immediately softened. "Sure, I'll go to the garage to get the car. Wait for me," he said, gently wrapping his arm around her waist. After speaking, he turned and walked away, slamming the garage door shut. Bang! The loud noise shattered the calm Aloan had been trying to maintain. Isolde walked over to her, the understanding expression on her face disappearing instantly. "I know you don't want him to know about your condition, so there's no need to thank me. What I did earlier was my duty." She winked at Aloan and then swayed away. Listening to the sound of the sports car driving away outside the window, Aloan smiled bitterly and struggled to her feet. She felt the blood draining from her body, her whole body shivering with cold, as if her soul might leave her body at any moment. Aloan wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, clenched her teeth, and slowly made her way back to her room. After taking the medicine, the pain in her body eased considerably, and she finally couldn't resist the exhaustion, falling into a deep sleep. After that, Aloan's appetite began to decline significantly, and she could barely eat anything. During these days, Thaddeus and Isolde were like two inseparable people, constantly appearing before her without any hesitation. Aloan watched Isolde and Thaddeus's intimate gestures with a faint expression, her mind drifting back to her past self. That happiness, that carefree innocence, her eyes and heart filled with nothing but the other person. She thought to herself, this is good, if one day she were no longer here. The two people she cared about most could continue to live happily together. Aloan rested at home for a few days, and it was almost time to go to the hospital to pick up her medicine. But as soon as she stepped out of the house, several unfamiliar men suddenly emerged from an alley. They looked fierce and clearly weren't good people. "Who are you?" Aloan frowned and stared at them warily. A young man stepped forward, his eyes darting up and down her body. "Are you Aloan?" Aloan had a bad feeling. And her instincts were correct. Just then, the man waved his hand and ordered, "Take her away." Ah. Aloan felt dizzy, and when she came to, she found herself tied to the pool railing, surrounded by cold water. The surroundings seemed to be an abandoned factory. Isolde stood by the pool, looking down at her. "Sister, you're awake." Isolde smiled. "Just in time, Thaddeus is almost here." Aloan looked at her. "Are you joking? Aren't you afraid Thaddeus will find out?" Aloan glanced at him, then turned away, seeming unwilling to look at him anymore. Isolde was crying bitterly. "Thaddeus, come save me. I'm so scared." Thaddeus' expression turned serious. He picked up the briefcase in his hand. "I've brought the money. Not a single cent is missing. Can I take them with me now?" The leader of the kidnappers gave his men a nod, and they immediately stepped forward and handed him the briefcase. The kidnappers counted the money, nodded in satisfaction, and said, "Of course you can take them. However, you can only take one person." Thaddeus suddenly looked up and asked angrily, "What do you mean by that?" The other man glanced at the three of them and said teasingly, "Nothing special. I just think the two pretty girls next to you are making me a little uncomfortable. I'm curious to know which of these two beauties you value more in your heart." Thaddeus reached out his hand to Isolde without hesitation and said, "I choose her." Aloan looked at Thaddeus, feeling a strange sensation in her heart. She thought she had let go, but why did her heart still ache in waves? "Aloan, Isolde isn't feeling well. I need to take care of her first." Thaddeus' voice was gentle yet firm. "You've always been stronger than Isolde. You can hold on a little longer. I'll be right back." With that, he picked up Isolde and hurried away. Aloan smiled, but a tear fell from the corner of her eye. Thaddeus didn't know that her body was already very weak and couldn't endure any more suffering. It was better that he didn't know. That way, he could continue to hate her. When she died, he probably wouldn't feel any sadness. Aloan lowered her head and looked at her chest. This was the outcome she had hoped for. So why did she still feel a twinge of pain in her heart? The leader of the kidnappers walked up to Aloan, pinched her mouth, and forced her to swallow a pill. "Isolde, don't blame me. The boss ordered me to do this just then." One of his henchmen rushed in, panicked. "Oh no, boss. The police are here." The man sighed in frustration, gesturing to his men. "Forget it, our job is done. Let's get out of here, don't bother with her anymore." Aloan struggled with her last ounce of strength, and the ropes binding her finally loosened slightly. However, her strength was nearly gone. Water poured into her mouth and nose, and her body felt an indescribable weakness. Was this finally the end? What a pity to die so painfully. Her body might not even be suitable for donation. She had always wanted to make one last contribution to this world, but it seemed all her hopes were now dashed. Lowen smiled bitterly, closed her eyes in exhaustion, and waited quietly for death to come. In her daze, she seemed to hear Thaddeus' voice in the distance. Aloan, Thaddeus had finally arrived and pulled her to safety. Aloan, wake up. Thaddeus hurriedly untied the ropes binding her and gently tapped her face. To his surprise, the first thing Aloan did after being freed was to embrace him. I feel terrible. Help me, she gasped, emitting a low moan. Thaddeus shone his flashlight and immediately noticed something was wrong with her. Her eyes were closed, her consciousness fading, and her entire body was burning hot, looking extremely painful. Aloan, do you know who I am? Thaddeus's gaze was intense, his voice low and hoarse. Aloan couldn't think about any of that. All she knew was that her body was about to give out. She didn't say much, just grabbed his collar and pulled it off. I know, you're my Thaddeus. Those few words shattered Thaddeus's tough exterior. He held her tightly in his arms and quickly got into the car. In that enclosed space, it felt like the entire world had vanished, leaving only the two of them. Be careful, Aloan. It hurts a little. Thaddeus paused for a moment before his movements became gentle. All right, don't worry, leave everything to me. Lowen didn't know when this intimate moment would end. When she woke up, she found herself back home, lying in the same bed as Thaddeus. Neither of them was wearing any clothes, and Thaddeus even had his arms around her waist, his body pressed tightly against her back. However, many other women had woken up in this bed before. Just like her now, having been held in his arms, Lowen felt a pang of sadness, her heart aching and her stomach cramping. She suddenly realized she hadn't eaten anything in days. Ugh, she turned over and began vomiting violently. Aloan, what's wrong? Thaddeus was startled awake and asked anxiously. After last night, Aloan had shown weakness to him for the first time, which warmed Thaddeus' heart. However, Aloan suddenly pushed him away and said, "Stay away from me." Her tone was cold, as if last night had been a dream. Thaddeus's previously cheerful mood turned sour, and his expression darkened. Does she think she's disgusting? That's why she keeps vomiting like this. He got out of bed, his face expressionless, called the driver, and prepared the car to take Aloan to the hospital. Aloan watched his back, feeling a pang of sadness. She knew he had misunderstood, but she didn't want to explain. Last night had been off from the start. It was her fault for not being resolute enough, letting herself be swayed by that moment of warmth. After waking up, they were still the same two people destined to be separated by thousands of miles, with no chance of turning back. At the hospital, a female doctor named Underwood conducted a thorough examination of Aloan. Holding the report in her hands, the experienced Dr. Serafina Underwood furrowed her brows and called Thaddeus into the room. "Sir, your wife's condition is critical," she began, but before she could finish, Thaddeus's phone rang. Answering the call, he heard Isolde's sobs. "Thaddeus, I've been in a car accident." Thaddeus's face turned tense. "Wait there, I'm on my way." He hung up and said to Dr. Serafina Underwood, "We'll discuss her condition later. I need to handle some matters." Without looking back, he left the hospital. Aloan watched his departing figure and sighed in relief. She then turned to Dr. Serafina Underwood and said, "Doctor, let's discuss my condition privately." Dr. Serafina Underwood pushed her glasses up and sighed. "Isolde, your body was already very weak. You were submerged in water for so long, and your fever was so high. You didn't rest much at all last night. Now, all your vital signs have dropped significantly. If this continues, you may not survive another 6 months. Moreover, you've completely lost your sense of taste, and your stomach's digestive capacity is only at 20%. From now on, you will have to rely on nutrient injections to stay alive." Aloan took the nutrient solution and accepted everything calmly. In the days that followed, Thaddeus stayed by Isolde's side. She said she had been terrified by the kidnappers and was having nightmares every night. Needing him to stay with her at all times, Thaddeus felt deeply sorry for Isolde and loved her dearly, rarely leaving her side, not even when he was working. Everyone at the company knew how much Thaddeus loved his wife, Isolde. 3 days before the euthanasia program was set to begin, Aloan went to the hospital for her final checkup. Dr. Serafina Underwood looked at the results and said with a complex expression, "Isolde, you're pregnant. I recommend you cancel the euthanasia plan and the body donation arrangements." Eloan froze in disbelief and asked, "Me, I'm pregnant?" Eloan felt a mix of emotions welling up inside her as she gently placed her hand on her stomach. Thinking about the little life growing inside her, she felt both excited and nervous, a feeling she couldn't quite describe. Dr. Serafina Underwood nodded. "That's right. If you plan to keep the baby, you'll need to rest and stay in bed, and we'll need some medical equipment to help you get through the pregnancy. However, the body donation plan will have to be canceled." Eloan thought for a moment and said, "Can you give me a few more days to think it over?" With a heavy heart, she left the ward and headed home. As she arrived at the elevator entrance of the gynecology department, she unexpectedly encountered two people. Thaddeus carefully supported Isolde, who blushed shyly as she touched her stomach. The man noticed Eloan beside him, his brows furrowing involuntarily. His voice was still cold. "Are you sick again?" Not long ago, he had just brought her to the hospital. What was she doing here now? Eloan remained silent. At that moment, she was debating whether to tell Thaddeus about her pregnancy. This wasn't just her child, it was his too. He had the right to know. Just then, Isolde walked toward her with a smile and said, "Sister, this is wonderful. I was just about to tell you some good news. I'm pregnant." Her face was radiant with happiness, as if she were truly Thaddeus's lawful wife. Eloan was pulled by her hand toward the staircase. Out of Thaddeus's sight, Isolde whispered, "Sister, coming to the obstetrics ward isn't a good idea. Do you think if something happens, which of us would Thaddeus save first?" Before Eloan could answer, Isolde suddenly pulled her hard, causing her to fall down the stairs with a scream. Under everyone's gaze, the two rolled down the stairs together, landing on the floor below. When they hit the ground, Isolde deliberately landed on top of Eloan. Thaddeus rushed over with a worried expression, running to Isolde's side. "Isolde, are you okay?" he asked anxiously. "Thaddeus, it hurts so much," Isolde cried, her face filled with despair. Thaddeus immediately turned around and glared at Eloan with eyes filled with anger. "What are you doing? You know Isolde is pregnant. Did you push her on purpose to harm her and the baby? I warn you, if anything happens to Isolde or the baby in her womb, I will never forgive you." Eloan felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen and a wet sensation below, causing her heart to race. Oh no, her child? Two nurses rushed over and helped Eloan into the ward. The doctor treating her was the same one from earlier. "Isolde, you?" The doctor was taken aback and immediately began examining and treating her. Unfortunately, in the end, she helplessly let go of her hands. "Isolde, the baby in your womb is gone. It was a girl." Eloan suddenly recalled what Thaddeus had once said. "We will have a daughter." He spoke so gently, his eyes filled with tenderness. "She would have been just like you, and I would have given her the best." Now, the child they had promised each other had come, but their relationship had changed, and it was no longer the same as before. Eloan shook her head gently on the hospital bed, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay. This is for the best. Even if she could have given birth to this child, she wouldn't have been able to be by her side." Thaddeus hated her so much. How could he possibly love a child who looked like her? Rather than let the child suffer in the future, it was better for her not to be born. "Child, wait a moment. Mother will be there soon to be with you. We will meet again down below." The doctor continued, "And the miscarriage has had a significant impact on your body. You may not be able to walk for some time." Eloan returned home in a wheelchair. Because Eloan was in front of her, Isolde didn't fall too hard, and the child wasn't seriously injured. Perhaps because of this, when Isolde suggested to Thaddeus that they get married, he agreed after a moment's thought. Over the next 2 days, Isolde's social media feed was filled with preparations for the wedding. She posted the news of her engagement to Thaddeus on social media, accompanied by 9 beautiful photos of her trying on different wedding dresses. Eloan's hand trembled slightly, but she quickly composed herself and gave it a like. Isolde seemed to have been waiting for her, immediately sending a private message. "Sister, which wedding dress do you think looks best on me? You're my sister, I trust your taste. Can you help me pick one?" Eloan thought for a moment and replied with just 3 words. The first one. He had once complimented the design. At that time, she and Thaddeus had already discussed marriage, and he had accompanied her to the store to try on every wedding dress, no matter which one she tried on. He always smiled and said it looked beautiful, his eyes filled with admiration and love. He knelt down on one knee, holding a diamond ring, and declared his intention to give his beloved the most magnificent wedding. However, time had moved on. Thaddeus did indeed throw a grand wedding for the woman he loved most, but the bride was not her. Eloan turned off her phone and curled up alone in the corner of the bed. Hugging herself tightly, Thaddeus and Isolde's wedding took place, as everyone had expected. Perhaps it was fate's arrangement that their wedding day coincided with the day Eloan had set as her own farewell. Early that morning, Thaddeus and Isolde, accompanied by their family and friends, happily made their way to the church. Before leaving, Thaddeus looked at Isolde with a complex expression and said in a serious tone, "Today is my wedding day with Isolde. Don't you have anything to say?" Eloan looked at the man in front of her, whose face was blurry due to her poor vision, and replied softly, "May you live a long and happy life together." What she said was truly from the bottom of her heart. One was the man she loved, and the other was her sister. But Thaddeus felt uneasy seeing her like this. He snorted coldly, "That's so fake?" After saying that, he left the villa without hesitation. Eloan was left alone in the villa. This was exactly what she wanted. Now, she could slowly finish her own affairs and quietly walk through the final chapter of her life. She lit the fireplace and threw all her personal belongings into it, burning them completely. She carefully counted all her assets and wrote several checks, donating them to various social institutions. After finishing these tasks, she rolled her wheelchair to the front door, hailed a taxi, and headed to the hospital to carry out her euthanasia plan. Her expression was calm. No one could tell that this was a path with no return. Thaddeus and Isolde's wedding was broadcast live. Before the surgery, Eloan couldn't resist opening the live stream. In the church, Thaddeus's family and friends gathered together. The atmosphere lively and joyful. Under the priest's witness, the two exchanged rings and kissed each other sweetly. If not for that accident, she and Thaddeus would have happily held their wedding and formed a warm family. The future she couldn't achieve, let Isolde fulfill it instead. "Doctor, I'm ready," Eloan whispered, turned off her phone, and lay down on the operating table. Every part of her body ached slightly, and her voice was as gentle as a light rain. The doctor shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry, Isolde, we can't perform the surgery yet. According to regulations, donating a body requires consent from the family, so we must notify your family and obtain their signature." Eloan weakly furrowed her brows. "My body, shouldn't I be the one to decide?" The doctors were also at a loss. This is the legal procedure we must follow. They hadn't anticipated someone coming alone for euthanasia without family present. "Then you can contact the second contact person in the address book. She is my younger sister, Isolde." The young nurse nodded and quickly entered the phone number, but didn't notice that she had accidentally opened the first contacts page. Wait, Eloan hadn't finished speaking when the call was already connected. She pursed her lips slightly and looked at the young nurse, her eyes revealing a hint of lingering affection that she herself didn't notice. This was the last time she would hear his voice. At that moment, Thaddeus was surrounded by everyone, pouring champagne from a tower with Isolde. The wine flowed slowly, but Thaddeus was a little restless because Eloan still hadn't approached him. Just then, the phone rang, and Thaddeus's restlessness vanished instantly. He smiled slightly and answered the phone. "Hello, who is this? Hello. Miss Eloan is currently at the hospital undergoing a euthanasia procedure. We require a direct relative to sign the organ donation consent form. Would you be able to come over immediately?" Euthanasia, Thaddeus's brows furrowed. Eloan had always been very mindful of her health. When they were together, she would constantly talk about staying healthy and said she wanted to live a very long life, so that her life wouldn't be in vain. A person like her wouldn't just give up so easily. Maybe it's because today was her wedding day, and she finally couldn't take it anymore. Thaddeus felt a mix of emotions, but he forced a cold smile. If she truly wanted to end her life, what right did he have to stop her? "Sign it." Isolde also picked up her phone and asked, "Is this the document my sister needs to sign?" "As her younger sister, I agree, sign it quickly." Isolde ended the call when Thaddeus wasn't looking and turned off her phone. The nurse called Eloan's first and second contacts again, but all she heard was the phone turned off. There was nothing she could do, so she sent a few text messages. But there was no response. Lying on the hospital bed, Eloan heard every word of their conversation. The last glimmer of light in her eyes faded away. She took out the divorce agreement she had brought with her, which had her and Thaddeus' signatures. She had seen it in the study. Thaddeus probably planned to come find me after the wedding to sign it. "We're already divorced. Therefore, This donation consent form doesn't need either of our signatures, right? The doctor nodded silently. All right, let's proceed with the euthanasia procedure immediately. The cold solution was injected into her body, and Aloan's consciousness began to fade. Many scenes flashed through her mind. At night, she and Thaddeus would hold each other tightly as they fell asleep, welcoming the morning sunlight. Every anniversary, Thaddeus would prepare a special surprise for her with great care. On warm summer nights, they would lie on the beach together, counting the stars and envisioning their shared future. Loan slowly closed her eyes, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Thaddeus, I will never see you again. I wish you good health and a long life. The day of Thaddeus and Isolde's wedding finally arrived, and everyone was looking forward to it. However, fate had arranged for this happy day to be the day Aloan had chosen to die. Early that morning, Thaddeus and Isolde, accompanied by their guests, set off for the church in high spirits. Before leaving, Thaddeus glanced at her, his expression complex and his tone cold. Today is my wedding day with Isolde. Don't you have anything to say? Aloan looked at the man before her, whose vision was slightly blurred, and spoke calmly. I wish you a long and happy life together. One was the man she loved deeply, and the other was her sister. These words came from the bottom of her heart. But when Thaddeus saw her like this, he felt extremely uncomfortable. He sneered coldly, how hypocritical. After saying that, he turned and left the villa, leaving Aloan alone inside. This was exactly what Aloan wanted. She could slowly take care of her own affairs and quietly walk through the final stage of her life. She lit the fire in the fireplace and threw all her personal belongings into it, completely destroying them. Then she counted all her assets, signed several checks, and donated the money to various social organizations. After finishing everything, she sat in her wheelchair, went to the front door, called a taxi, and headed to a hospital where she planned to undergo euthanasia. She looked calm, showing no signs that this journey was a farewell. Thaddeus and Isolde's wedding was being live-streamed. Before the surgery, Aloan couldn't resist opening the live stream. In the church, Thaddeus's family and friends gathered together. Under the priest's witness, the two exchanged rings, kissed each other, and the atmosphere was very sweet. If it weren't for that accident, she and Thaddeus could have had a happy wedding, started a family, and had children. The future she couldn't achieve. Let Isolde fulfill it for her. Doctor, I'm ready. Aloan quietly turned off her phone and lay down on the operating table. She felt a dull pain throughout her body, her voice as soft as raindrops. The surgeon shook his head and said, I'm sorry, Isolde, we can't start yet. According to regulations, body donation must first obtain consent from the family. So we need to notify your family and obtain their written signature. Aloan weakly furrowed her brows. My body? Shouldn't I be the one to decide? The attending physician also felt torn. This is the legal procedure. We must follow it. They hadn't anticipated someone coming alone for euthanasia, without family present. Then call the second contact in the address book. She is my younger sister, Isolde. The young nurse nodded and quickly entered the phone number, but she didn't notice that she had accidentally clicked on the first contacts page. Wait a moment, Aloan had just finished speaking when the phone rang. She bit her lips slightly and looked at the young nurse beside her, her eyes betraying a hint of reluctance. This was the last time she would hear his voice. At that moment, Thaddeus, surrounded by everyone, was pouring champagne from a tower with Isolde. The liquid flowed slowly. But Thaddeus felt a bit annoyed because Aloan hadn't contacted him yet. Just then, the phone rang, and Thaddeus's irritation seemed to vanish instantly. He smiled slightly and answered the call. Hello, who is this? Hello, Miss Aloan is currently at the hospital undergoing a euthanasia procedure. We need a direct relative to come and sign the body donation consent form. Would you be able to come now? Euthanasia procedure, Thaddeus furrowed his brows. Aloan had always cherished her body. She used to talk about health and wellness all the time, and had even said she wanted to live a long life so as not to waste her time on this earth. Someone like her would never give up her life so easily. Today was her wedding day, and she couldn't hold back any longer. Thaddeus felt a surge of joy inside, but on the surface, he gave a cold smile. If she really wanted to do this, he had no reason to oppose it. Sign it. Isolde took the phone from him. Was it her sister asking her to sign some documents? When the nurse called Aloan's first and second emergency contacts again, all they heard was the phone being turned off. The nurse sent several text messages, but received no response. Lying on the hospital bed, Aloan heard their conversation, and the last glimmer of hope in her eyes finally vanished. She took out the divorce agreement she had been carrying with her, which bore her and Thaddeus' signatures. She had found this agreement in the study. Thaddeus had probably planned to have her sign it after the wedding. We're already divorced. Then this donation consent form doesn't need anyone's signature, right? The attending physician nodded silently. Let's proceed with the euthanasia immediately. The cold liquid entered her body, and Aloan's thoughts began to grow fuzzy. Many scenes flashed through her mind. At night, she and Thaddeus would cuddle up together and fall asleep, welcoming the morning sun together. On every special day, Thaddeus would prepare surprises for her with great care. On gentle summer nights, they lay on the beach together, counting stars and envisioning their future. Aloan slowly closed her eyes, tears silently falling. Thaddeus, you will never appear again. May you live a long and healthy life. With everything going smoothly, the operating room door suddenly closed. After stepping out, the security guards unconsciously relaxed their grip. Thaddeus broke free from the security guard's grip, rushed forward and pounded on the door. Open the door. Aloan is my wife. I won't let you take her organs. I won't allow this. Do you understand? The man shouted loudly, completely disregarding his appearance until he was too exhausted to continue, his voice hoarse. Passing patients looked at him with sympathy. He's so young. And his wife must be young too. It's such a pity, so heartbreaking. At that moment, Thaddeus heard a voice. Thaddeus, please calm down. He turned his head and saw a female doctor wearing glasses standing not far away. Are you the doctor who examined Aloan earlier? Not long ago, this female doctor had conducted a physical examination on Aloan. He vaguely remembered that the doctor had looked serious at the time, as if she had something important to tell him. But he had left without looking back because of Isolde's phone call. If he had stayed there and listened patiently to the doctor explain Aloan's condition, perhaps things wouldn't have turned out this way. Thaddeus clutched his chest, feeling a sharp pain in his heart, as if it were being torn apart. Dr. Serafina Underwood looked complex and sad. Thaddeus, Isolde's decision to donate her organs was her own choice. She hoped that through this way, she could save more lives and continue her existence in another form. If you truly loved her, you should respect her decision. Thaddeus lowered his hands from the door and slowly collapsed onto the ground, as if all his strength had been drained from him. He no longer made a sound, but knelt dejectedly at the operating room door, waiting quietly for the surgery to end. Aloan, if this is what you want, I will grant you your wish. He thought, as memories of Aloan flashed through his mind. Her gaze toward him was filled with disappointment, her body growing weaker. Though her heart was breaking, she forced herself to smile. Thaddeus regretted not noticing Aloan's changes sooner, and instead constantly hurting and insulting her. As a result, Aloan grew increasingly disappointed in him and ultimately chose to leave this world alone. At that moment, Thaddeus' despair not only evoked sympathy from those unaware of the truth, but also drew whispers from the nurses. Not long ago, the hospital had called Thaddeus numerous times and sent many messages informing him about Isolde's decision to donate her body. However, he paid no attention to them and did not respond at all. His cold responses over the phone made even Isolde and others feel a chill in their hearts. When Isolde left, tears streamed down her face. Was that the man mentioned on the phone, Isolde's husband? That's right. We called him to sign the papers before the surgery, but he didn't even turn on his phone. Now that Isolde is gone, he suddenly shows up acting so heartbroken, pretending to be so devoted. What's the point of that? She's already gone. The nurses shook their heads, their eyes filled with disapproval. At that moment, a woman's voice suddenly rang out nearby. Thaddeus. Brother, a young girl dressed elegantly rushed toward Thaddeus. She supported him, her face tense. Are you okay? Are you hurt? But Thaddeus's cold gaze made her dare not move. Leaving her standing there awkwardly, Thaddeus looked at her with red eyes. You've always known about Aloan's condition, haven't you? She was Aloan's sister. And the two were very close. If anyone knew about Aloan's condition, it must be Isolde. Thaddeus's gaze was sharp, causing Isolde to startle. She instinctively looked away, her face showing a hint of tension. She bit her lip, then looked up with an innocent expression. Thaddeus, what do you mean? Could that phone call from my sister really be true? She tried to look confused. I really don't know. Thaddeus, you should know my sister's personality. She's so stubborn. How could she possibly want anyone to see her vulnerable side? Hearing this, Thaddeus paused for a moment. Yes, his Aloan had always been so determined and brave, supporting everyone through all the difficulties on her own. She was always so strong that she even ignored her own pale complexion. Thinking of this, Thaddeus suddenly remembered something and was startled. He immediately stood up, ignoring Isolde's cries, and rushed to Dr. Serafina Underwood's office. Dr. Serafina Underwood handed Thaddeus a thick folder containing all of Isolde's medical records. Thaddeus took it and flipped through the pages carefully, his expression growing heavier with each turn. According to the records, the day Aloan had her last hospital visit coincided with the day Isolde discovered she was pregnant. Thaddeus suddenly recalled what had happened that day. Aloan and Isolde had fallen down the stairs and were lying on the ground, already very weak, but he hadn't bothered to check on them, instead threatening her because of some inappropriate words she had said. At that moment, Thaddeus recalled the past, filled with regret, wishing he could change his actions from back then. According to Dr. Serafina Underwood's records, it was even clearly stated that Aloan had miscarried a child for him. The fetus had already begun to take shape. It was a baby girl. Dr. Serafina Underwood looked at Thaddeus's expression and had many words she wanted to say, but in the end, she could only utter one sentence. As a doctor, she had no right to blame anyone, even if Thaddeus was as unreliable as he was. She could only choose to remain silent. Thaddeus forced himself to stay calm as he flipped through the records in his hands. He suddenly furrowed his brows and asked in a low voice, "Aloan's health has always been good, hasn't it? Why has it suddenly deteriorated so much?" Dr. Serafina Underwood sighed helplessly. As Isolde's husband, Thaddeus knew nothing about her health condition. The doctor sighed again and finally spoke honestly. Isolde is missing a kidney and half a liver, and her condition has reached a critically dangerous stage. She had been relying on various medications to stay alive. The doctor's words left Thaddeus speechless. He looked up at her in disbelief. "You mean Aloan has been acting perfectly normal in front of me all this time? When exactly did she lose those 2 organs?" At that moment, Thaddeus couldn't help but recall Aloan's recent episodes of coughing up blood and frequent hospital visits. So, her health issues had actually been evident for some time. Unfortunately, he had chosen to ignore them, thinking Aloan was just trying to elicit sympathy by deliberately acting pitiful. He was truly foolish for not seeing Aloan's suffering. Thaddeus felt deeply regretful and couldn't help covering his chest with his hands. The pain was intense, as if something was tearing at his heart. At that moment, Isolde rushed in from outside. "Thaddeus, let's go register our marriage." Isolde looked at Thaddeus with emotion and said, "A few days ago, my sister specifically told me to hurry up and register our marriage with Thaddeus. At the time, I didn't know why she said that, but now I realize she must have known her time was running out, so she wanted us to get married, so I could take her place and take care of you." This was her last wish. She thought that as long as Aloan was moved out, Thaddeus would obey, but the turn of events caught her off guard, because Thaddeus merely gave a bitter smile, then took Aloan's medical records and turned to leave. Aloan was already dead. No matter how many women he brought back or how sweet he was with Isolde, she would never see her again and wouldn't feel jealous over such things. Therefore, Thaddeus no longer needed to waste his time on Isolde. From that day on, he became a different person, completely shutting himself off from the world. He spent every day in his study, drinking himself into a stupor, refusing to let anyone disturb him. Aloan's death had taken his heart with her. Now there was only an empty shell left, devoid of all emotion. "Aloan, I was truly wrong. Please come back." In the study, Thaddeus lay on the carpet, crying out repeatedly, "I swear, the only person I truly love is you." Isolde stood outside the study door, her face filled with displeasure. She said, "Thaddeus, even though my sister has left, you still have me and our baby. Please open the door and let me in. The baby just kicked my stomach again." "It misses its father too?" Isolde gently stroked her stomach, tears welling up in her eyes. After Aloan's death, she had secretly rejoiced, believing she could finally secure her position. But she never imagined Thaddeus didn't care about her at all. He didn't even acknowledge her existence as if she were invisible, let alone marrying her. That was nothing but a fantasy. Up until now, she couldn't even call herself Mrs. Whitfield properly, and she could be kicked out by Thaddeus at any moment. This made Isolde extremely anxious. She was so anxious that she couldn't sit still or stand up straight. Let's go, with a crash. Thaddeus in the study threw a wine bottle at the door. The piercing sound made Isolde scream and turn to run away. Sister, you're gone, but I still feel like I can't compete with you. Why does Thaddeus still only have eyes for you? What am I lacking compared to you? Isolde clenched her lips in anger, digging her nails deeply into her palms, a flash of madness in her eyes. The next day, a large crowd gathered outside Thaddeus's house, including journalists, paparazzi, and influencers. Everyone rushed forward, pulling out their cameras to start filming. An influencer sneaked past the Whitfield family's security guards, climbed over the fence, and entered the house. Upon seeing Isolde, he immediately aimed his phone camera at her. Hello, Isolde. I'm live streaming right now. Can I ask you a few questions? Isolde jumped in surprise. You? How did you get in? She was wearing a simple maternity dress, seemingly unintentionally pushing out her stomach, exposing it to the camera. Isolde, I heard you and Thaddeus got married, but it seems you never registered the marriage. Is that true? Legally speaking, you're still unmarried, right? And you're pregnant with Thaddeus's child. The influencer bluntly stated what everyone was thinking. Isolde shrank her shoulders, her eyes immediately reddening, her expression a mix of hurt and restraint. It's not like that. Thaddeus isn't that kind of person. He's been in a bad mood lately. That's why he doesn't want to register the marriage with me. He'll definitely go once some time has passed. Isolde tried to defend Thaddeus, but her trembling voice betrayed her true feelings. Online netizens were furious and began to blame Thaddeus, feeling unjust for Isolde. This Thaddeus is so unreliable. That's right, Mrs. Whitfield is already pregnant with his child, and he's still making excuses not to register the marriage. Does he want me to raise the child while he doesn't take responsibility? Mrs. Whitfield is so pitiful. I hope she can bravely stand up and fight back, preferably abort the child and leave that unworthy man. At that moment, sounds came from the study door, and Thaddeus, who had been silent for several days, finally appeared. He looked dejected, reeking of alcohol, clearly drunk. What are you all arguing about outside? Thaddeus furrowed his brows slightly, his tone cold. The influencer immediately held up her phone and approached him fearlessly, asking, Thaddeus, when you were wrongfully imprisoned, it was Miss Isolde who worked hard to help you and found the crucial evidence to clear your name. So why, after marrying her, are you unwilling to register the marriage? Don't you think this is inappropriate? Hearing this, Thaddeus couldn't help but laugh softly. He had only ever intended to marry one person in his life, and that was the late Eloan. As for Isolde, Thaddeus looked up at the woman hiding behind him, his expression growing dark. My affairs are none of your concern. Do you understand? He spoke with unwavering resolve. Isolde's face turned pale, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. The live stream grew increasingly chaotic, with the number of online viewers steadily rising. This guy is way too much. We need to unite and boycott the Whitfield group to crash its stock price. The influencer read out the netizens' comments one by one in front of Thaddeus, clearly enjoying the commotion. In truth, Thaddeus couldn't care less about these trivial matters. All he knew was that since Eloan had left, this noisy world had become a living hell for him. Someone, take him out after speaking? Thaddeus gave orders to his servants. Then, he shook his head impatiently and turned to leave. Suddenly, several police officers in uniform appeared at the door. What is this about? Thaddeus furrowed his brows and stopped in his tracks. Hello, is this the residence of Miss Eloan? The officer in the middle asked. Upon hearing Eloan's name, Thaddeus couldn't help but tremble slightly, his expression growing complex. What do you want with her? One of the officers approached Thaddeus and said, Hello, I'm Officer Gideon Lockhart. You must be Mr. Thaddeus? Eloan's husband, correct? Please ask Eloan to come out. We have some important matters to discuss with her. Thaddeus lowered his head, his voice sounding very sad. You don't need to look for her anymore. Just tell me what you need to know, because Eloan has left us forever. Officer Gideon Lockhart thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, I can tell you about it. He waved his hand, and the two police officers beside him immediately handed several items to Thaddeus. Here's the situation. The organ trafficking ring that Miss Eloan was infiltrating has been completely eradicated by the police. This is a banner and a letter of commendation for Miss Eloan. Previously, because some criminals were still at large, we had to keep this matter confidential to protect Miss Eloan's safety. However, Now everyone knows about Miss Alohan's heroic deeds. Upon hearing Officer Gideon Lockhart's words, Thaddeus was so shocked that he took 2 steps back. He held the banner in his hands, trembling uncontrollably. Alohan, an undercover agent? Alohan lost a kidney and half her liver because she went undercover to investigate the organ trafficking syndicate. Thaddeus suddenly understood everything. So, the evidence that exonerated me back then, Officer Gideon Lockhart immediately responded, was found by Alohan during her undercover operation. She gave the evidence to her sister. I sold to present in court on your behalf. Don't you understand any of this yet? Officer Gideon Lockhart looked surprised, furrowing his brows. I thought Alohan had already told you about what happened afterward. Officer Gideon Lockhart's words were like a bombshell. Thaddeus's eyes widened suddenly, and his heart raced like a storm. But in the end, he could only shake his head helplessly and whisper, "No, she didn't tell me anything." Not a single word. Thaddeus's voice choked up, and he felt as though his heart was being torn apart. Alohan, Alohan, how much have you sacrificed for me? I have no idea. Isolde, terrified, stepped back, wishing she could vanish into thin air. Now that Thaddeus knew the truth, how would he treat her? Isolde trembled all over, too afraid to even imagine. The influencer who had been called by Isolde for an interview also felt awkward. He cleared his throat uncomfortably and changed his tone. Everyone, listen to this big news. Did you all hear that? It turns out that Isolde. He continued talking nonstop as he walked out of the house. Finally, Thaddeus raised his head again and looked at everyone seriously. Officer Gideon Lockhart, from now on, you don't need to look for Alohan anymore, because Alohan has passed away. He gave a wry smile, gently stroking the silk banner in his hands as if it held Alohan's soul. Upon hearing this news, Officer Gideon Lockhart and the others also paled. When did this happen? Thaddeus sighed, his eyes filled with regret and sorrow. It was just half a month ago, and she even donated her organs to save 5 lives. Alohan, such a selfless, brave, and great person, though her life was short like a fleeting firework, she brought brilliant light to this world. At that moment, Thaddeus felt he was unworthy of Alohan's beauty. Officer Gideon Lockhart remained silent for a moment before telling Thaddeus something. Thaddeus, when you were undercover at the crime scene, Alohan could have escaped. She returned to save a little girl, was captured by the criminals, and lost a kidney and half her liver. Combined with the organ donation you mentioned, Isolde's contributions were truly immense. Therefore, I will personally request a martyr's medal for Isolde. Thaddeus, please try to find peace in your grief. Officer Gideon Lockhart shook hands with Thaddeus and said those words. After Officer Gideon Lockhart and the others left, Thaddeus remained standing there, unable to snap out of it for a long time. Alohan, you actually sacrificed so much for me and never betrayed me. Why did you keep all this from me? This made me do so many things that hurt you. And in the end, you left this world with hatred toward me. Thaddeus' voice was low and filled with uncontrollable sorrow. Suddenly, he remembered something. When he was arrested and imprisoned, Alohan had publicly announced her relationship and then left the country with her new boyfriend. The person she had announced her relationship with was Thaddeus' best friend, Alistair, so they had been deceiving him all along. At this thought, Thaddeus's expression grew cold, and he clenched his jaw tightly. Then he rushed out the door, jumped into his car, and sped away. Half an hour later, in a visiting room at the city prison, Alistair, dressed in prison garb, looked calmly at Thaddeus before him. Seemingly unfazed, tell me the truth? What really happened between you and Alohan? Thaddeus rushed forward, grabbed Alistair's clothes, and shouted angrily. At first, he had kindly promoted Alistair and given him an important position at Whitfield Group. He never expected that this so-called brother would, out of jealousy, collude with an organ trafficking ring and set a trap for him. Later, when he was in trouble, Alistair even publicly started a relationship with Alohan and left with her. Every time Thaddeus thought about the past, he was furious with Alistair. But why, when Alohan had already lost her feelings for him, did she go to work as an undercover agent for the organ trafficking gang? Thaddeus couldn't understand. Facing Thaddeus's madness and anger, Alistair remained calm. He roughly pushed Thaddeus's hand away and mockingly looked at him. You still don't know the truth even now? Thaddeus froze. What do you mean by that? Alistair gave a cold smile. Back then, Alohan pretended to be nice to me to save you. She got the location of the gang from me. Then she went alone into a dangerous place to find their criminal evidence. When she entered, to pass the gang leader's test, she was locked in a water cell for 10 whole days. Later, to gain the leader's trust, she even took a bullet for him during a police standoff. If that bullet had missed by 2 centimeters, Aloan would have been dead. What do you think of that? Seeing Thaddeus's shocked and disbelieving expression, Alistair felt a little more at ease. Then he continued to deepen the wound in Thaddeus' heart. Aloan found the gang's criminal evidence and could have chosen to leave, but at that very moment, she came across a young girl who was about to be organ harvested. Unable to bear seeing the 10-year-old girl die tragically, Aloan handed over the evidence to Isolde and risked her life to rescue the girl. But this time, she wasn't so lucky. I had already revealed her true identity to the gang. I'm sorry, I can't grant this request. Hearing Alistair's words, Thaddeus felt as though he had been struck by lightning. It turned out that Aloan had never betrayed him. She had made such a great sacrifice to clear his name. It was truly unexpected. He was such a fool, the most foolish and ignorant person in the world. Thaddeus looked up and glared at Alistair, who was standing before him with a smug expression. It was because he had revealed Aloan's true identity that she had suffered at the hands of those villains. This man was truly infuriating. Thaddeus clenched his fists and struck Alistair with all his might. You despicable creature, you've ruined my Aloan. Do you want to die? He kept punching him, raining blows on Alistair's body, leaving him covered in blood, but the anger in his heart didn't subside. If the guards hadn't heard the commotion and rushed over to pull him away, Alistair might have been beaten to death by the enraged Thaddeus. Seeing Thaddeus being taken away by the guards, Alistair's eyes gleamed with triumph. Sometimes, the pain in one's heart can be more torturous than physical pain. As Thaddeus walked out of the prison gates, his expression grew somber. He then pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Hello, I need you to look into something immediately. Shortly after, the other party sent the information they had found to Thaddeus's phone. Sure enough, after Aloan found the evidence from the criminal gang, she had directly handed over the materials to Isolde, asking her to help Thaddeus overturn the case. Unbelievably, Isolde had appropriated all the evidence and told Thaddeus it was her own discovery. Thaddeus was furious, rushing back home and dragging Isolde out. Thaddeus, don't do this, Isolde struggled to say, her neck tightly gripped by Thaddeus. The Thaddeus before her was filled with rage as if he might erupt at any moment. Why did you do this? Why didn't you tell me about Aloan? Why did you take credit for something you didn't do, making me think you were the one who found the evidence to defend yourself? Thaddeus asked coldly, as if he wanted to tear the woman in front of him to pieces. Isolde's heart tightened, but she still put on an innocent expression. I didn't. She struggled to suppress her inner panic, knowing that no matter what, she couldn't admit to it. Aloan was already dead, no matter what doubts Thaddeus had. As long as she refused to admit it, no one could prove she was the one who did it. She had put so much effort into this, and she had waited so long for this day. She couldn't let all her efforts go to waste now. Thaddeus angrily threw the paper in his hand at her face. Now, you still refuse to admit it. The police case file makes it clear that it was because Aloan went undercover in the criminal organization that the evidence was obtained. Isolde, you've caused me great harm. Thaddeus's eyes were filled with anger. He had genuinely believed that Aloan had abandoned him, but Isolde had proven his innocence at the crucial moment and presented the evidence. Isolde had confided in him countless times, recounting how hard she had worked to find the evidence that cleared his name. Thaddeus had always remembered her kindness and had compromised time and again for her, even going so far as to harm Aloan. But all of it was a lie. If it weren't for this woman, how could Aloan have felt so desperate and chosen to give up on herself? Thinking of this, Thaddeus's anger grew even more intense, and he struck harder. Isolde, upon seeing the evidence, panicked completely. She clung tightly to Thaddeus's hand and pleaded urgently. Thaddeus, please don't blame me. I did this because I love you so much. Ever since I first saw you long ago, I've loved you. I wanted to be close to you like my sister was. Tears streamed down her face, making her look pitiful. And my sister never wanted you to know her true condition. Wasn't it because she didn't want you to be sad when she left? I was just following my sister's wishes. Even if it's for her sake, you shouldn't treat me like this. When she mentioned Aloan, Thaddeus paused for a moment, and the strength in his hands indeed loosened. Isolde saw this and immediately felt afraid. She quickly broke free from his grip and turned to run away as fast as she could. She feared Thaddeus would catch up and that she might be in danger. Soon after, the police confirmed Aloan was a martyr and delivered the relevant documents to Thaddeus. Major media outlets followed up with extensive coverage. Earlier, in many influencers' live streams, everyone witnessed Officer Gideon Lockhart arrive and reveal Aloan's true identity. It turned out that Aloan was an unsung hero who bravely risked her life to eliminate some criminals and protect public safety. However, her sister, Isolde, took advantage of the situation and stole her sister's husband. On the very day Isolde married her sister's husband, it was also the day Aloan, the martyr, passed away. Public opinion online quickly shifted, and those who had previously sympathized with Isolde began to condemn her. Who would have thought that this woman would dare to take her sister's husband? That's truly despicable. She even pretends to be innocent. Isolde is truly disgusting. She should be dealt with properly. That's right, she should be severely punished so that Aloan's spirit can rest in peace. As for Thaddeus, he's no better. I think he should be dealt with as well. Netizens were furious, eager to see both Isolde and Thaddeus punished severely. Some programmers even created a website in memory of Aloan, allowing netizens to mourn and commemorate her online. Isolde was terrified by the online abuse, hiding at home all day, too afraid to go out, like a mouse afraid of the light. Thaddeus, however, remained locked in his room every day, unconcerned with the turmoil outside. He sat on the ground, staring blankly at a few old photos of Aloan in his hands. In the past, Thaddeus and Aloan had taken many photos together, but because he misunderstood Aloan and believed she had betrayed him, he deleted all the photos of her from his home as soon as he was released from prison. Now, he could only stare at their wedding certificate photo, where they didn't smile, and Aloan's graduation photo. No matter how much people outside cursed him, it wouldn't affect him because his heart had already died with Aloan. Until one day, Thaddeus's alarm clock rang and he saw the time on the screen, suddenly snapping back to reality. He stepped out of the study, shaved off his beard, took a shower, and put on his favorite black suit. On his birthday, Aloan had specially commissioned the world's top tailor to custom make a suit for him. Today, he was wearing that suit to attend the official memorial service for Aloan. He knew Aloan didn't like him looking listless, so today he made sure to look his best. He quickly drove to the largest funeral home in the city and walked inside alone. The weather was bad today, with thick clouds covering the sky, making Aloan's funeral feel even more somber. Outside the funeral home, white flowers were arranged in a long line, and sorrowful music echoed through the air. Although many people came to mourn Aloan with heavy hearts, there was a group that stood out. They knelt neatly at the entrance of the funeral home, facing inward, and bowed their heads a total of 108 times. Who were they? Today was the final farewell for Aloan, the martyr, and the families of the 5 patients who had been saved by her organ donations had come to send her off on her final journey. Look, there are also the family members of the little girl who was rescued by Aloan from an organ trafficking ring. Many people were whispering among themselves, completely unaware that the man walking past them was Aloan's husband. Thaddeus's good fortune did not last long. He entered the funeral home, approached Aloan's coffin, and removed the sunglasses from his face. The scene before him revealed that Aloan's body had already been sewn up, dressed, and prepared. Her eyes were tightly closed, as if she were lost in a beautiful dream. "Aloan, I've come to find you." Thaddeus' tears suddenly flowed, falling onto Aloan's already cold body. However, the next moment, he was recognized for being too close to the coffin. "Thaddeus, how dare you show up here? You treated Isolde so badly before, and now you dare to come see her. Don't you fear nightmares? Leave immediately, or else I won't hold back." Many people looked angry and approached Thaddeus. "I just want to spend more time with Aloan. Please, I beg you." Thaddeus' voice was hoarse, pleading, "I am her husband. Please let me accompany her on her final journey. I know I wronged Aloan, believe me. I will make it up to her." The people around him were furious, accusing him. "Make it up. Do you think atonement can bring Isolde back to life? You don't deserve to be Isolde's husband. Get him out of here. Don't let him disturb Isolde's peace." Everyone's faces were filled with anger. They pushed Thaddeus and drove him out without mercy. Aloan, Thaddeus struggled desperately to return to Aloan's coffin, but was eventually forced to leave the inner sanctum. The sky grew darker, and cold raindrops fell, hitting Thaddeus's body and face. He stood alone at the entrance of the funeral home, letting the rain soak him completely. After the memorial service, the police arrived specially, carrying Alohan's coffin, and escorted it all the way to the cemetery. Thaddeus drove his car, following far behind. Upon arriving at the cemetery, he saw Alohan's tombstone, and tears streamed down his face as he knelt down. He watched as Alohan's coffin was slowly lowered into the ground, his heart aching as if it were being cut by a knife. He bowed his head and prayed silently with everyone else. Alohan, I no longer have the chance to make it up to you. However, I will never forgive those who hurt you. After the funeral, Thaddeus drove back to the house where Alohan was no longer there. He walked into the living room, soaking wet. Isolde was sitting on the sofa, busy organizing the pile of jewelry Thaddeus had given her. After Alohan's affair was exposed, she dared not go out. She had become someone everyone wanted to avoid, and could only stay at home looking at the jewelry to feel slightly better. Thaddeus's heart was filled with hatred and disgust. In the past, to make Alohan jealous, Thaddeus had taken Isolde to luxury stores to shop. Whatever jewelry Isolde liked, no matter how expensive, Thaddeus would buy it without hesitation. He knew Isolde would wear it and shine in front of Alohan. He always secretly hoped for Alohan's reaction. He fantasized that one day Alohan would come to him out of jealousy, or act spoiled, and ask him to buy her something. But Alohan always remained indifferent, as if these things were nothing more than insignificant pebbles in her eyes. Thaddeus felt disappointed time and again, feeling like a ridiculous clown putting on a show for no one. Alohan looked at him with a hint of pity in her eyes, as if mocking his mediocrity. At that moment, Isolde didn't care about any of this. She firmly believed that storms would eventually pass, and the traces left by those who had departed would eventually fade away. By then, Thaddeus's mind would no longer hold any memories of Alohan, but would instead be filled with Isolde's figure. She heard Thaddeus's voice and immediately lifted her head in joy. Thaddeus, brother, she put down the jewelry in her hands and rushed toward him, wanting to snuggle into his arms and use her tenderness to make him feel at ease. However, Thaddeus's gaze was like a knife, piercing straight into her heart. Today is Alohan's funeral. As her sister, why didn't you attend? His icy voice carried a hint of tension. Isolde shrank her shoulders and bit her lip. Thaddeus, the people outside are attacking me online. I'm scared if I go out they might catch me. You don't know how crazy they are. If they find me, I'll be in danger. Thaddeus' expression was complicated. So, you're too afraid to even attend your own sister's funeral? Isolde froze, her eyes darting around. She had actually hoped Alohan would meet an accident long ago. How could she risk being attacked just to attend her funeral? Thaddeus looked deeply pained and angry, feeling wronged on Alohan's behalf. He had grown up with Alohan and had seen how much she cared for Isolde, whether it was in life or in studies. Alohan had always supported Isolde wholeheartedly. Without Alohan's help, how could Isolde have become a lawyer? Isolde had always been jealous of Alohan, but Alohan had never spoken ill of her and had always tried to protect her. But Alohan, look at her. What kind of person is she that you've worked so hard to protect? Not only has she forgotten all the good you've done for her, but she's openly stolen your reputation and even tried to take your husband now that you're dead. She doesn't care at all. She doesn't even want to attend your funeral. Thaddeus truly felt that he had been so foolish to be attracted to such a selfish and cruel woman. He looked at Isolde, suppressing the unusual emotions in his eyes, and walked over to embrace her. I'm sorry, Isolde. I lost control just now. His voice was gentle and kind, as if he were whispering to the person he loved most. Isolde was taken aback by his sudden change. However, she didn't want to miss this opportunity. Thaddeus had been angry with her before, but now he was finally willing to make amends, so she had to seize this chance. So, Isolde hugged him and said emotionally, Thaddeus, will you finally forgive me? I know you've been sad about my sister's death, but I've been sad too. But my sister once said that she hoped we would be happy. She can't come back anymore. But I'll always be by your side, never leaving you. As she spoke, her face grew increasingly joyful, as if she could already envision the happy life she would share with Thaddeus. Thaddeus whispered, Isolde, you're right. Let's go get married right now. Okay. Isolde's heart was filled with excitement. She tightly grasped Thaddeus's hand and happily replied, Yes, I knew Thaddeus wouldn't abandon me. Isolde's smile couldn't be contained. She looked at Alohan's photo in the room and thought triumphantly, Sister. Everything you had will be mine. How could someone who's no longer here compete with me? She didn't know that. Out of her sight, Thaddeus's expression was cold, and his eyes gleamed with a hint of madness. Thaddeus silently watched as Isolde organized the documents and then led her to the car. Throughout the journey, Isolde's smile never faded. However, Thaddeus's car veered further and further off the main road, traveling deeper into the countryside. Isolde grew anxious. Thaddeus, where are we going? I checked. The Civil Affairs Bureau isn't in this direction, is it? Thaddeus didn't respond. Finally, the car came to a stop on a secluded street. It was a rundown slum area with an unremarkable building. He led Isolde upstairs and knocked on a door. The person inside peeked out, and upon seeing Thaddeus, immediately let them both in. Thaddeus, why did you bring me here? Aren't we supposed to go get our marriage certificate? Isolde looked around the room. Feeling confused, there were several rooms, and in each room, there were several people moving around, and she couldn't figure out what they were doing. Thaddeus said nothing, just pushed her into one of the rooms. The room was filled with cold medical equipment and various knives, making her feel afraid. Go up, Thaddeus pointed to the operating table and told Isolde to go over. Suddenly, Isolde felt completely at a loss. Thaddeus, what are you doing? Thaddeus looked up at her. A cold smile on his lips. You're living so well in the Whitfield family now, dressed so nicely and eating so well. You probably know what these things are for, don't you? Hearing this, Isolde suddenly understood. Her face turned pale and she began to back away. Thaddeus, please don't. But Thaddeus had already reached out and picked up the longest surgical knife. That's right. All of this was obtained by trading one of Aloan's kidneys and half of her liver. You deceived me, so taking one of your kidneys and half of your liver isn't wrong. Is it? Thaddeus's eyes had turned fierce, like those of a wild beast. Isolde's debt to Aloan must be repaid, not a single penny less. But Isolde was terrified, feeling fragile as if she might collapse at any moment. She wanted to turn and run away, but all her strength seemed to have been drained from her body. Thaddeus, please don't do this. I know I was wrong. I'll never lie again, she cried hysterically, shaking her head violently. I really know I was wrong. Her pleas for mercy were meaningless, for Thaddeus felt no pity for her. All he could think of now was avenging Aloan. Seeing that Isolde was still resisting, Thaddeus finally lost patience, grabbed her hand, and dragged her forcefully toward the operating table. Let me go. Help me, Isolde struggled desperately, screaming in despair. But in the end, she was forcibly pinned down on the operating table by Thaddeus. Now, you must repay your sister's debt, Isolde. Don't worry, surgery isn't that painful. After all, your sister didn't utter a single sound when she had her surgery. Isolde could no longer hear Thaddeus' words. She only understood that Thaddeus had lost his mind, but she was powerless to resist and could only watch helplessly as he picked up the scalpel. No, at that moment, Isolde felt overwhelming panic. However, Thaddeus did not use the scalpel. Just then, a commotion and chaos erupted at the door, followed by a rush of police officers bursting in. Don't move. We received a report that there's an illegal clinic here. Everyone, put your hands on your heads and get down. The police shouted orders, holding their guns aimed at everyone in the room. Everyone obeyed immediately, except for Thaddeus's room, which remained silent. At that moment, he was completely unaware of the changes outside and remained focused on his own task. Help, save me, Isolde screamed in panic. Suddenly, someone ran in from outside. It was Officer Gideon Lockhart and others. Thaddeus, stop. Officer Gideon Lockhart immediately shouted, trying to stop Thaddeus. However, despite the guns pointed at him, Thaddeus paid no attention. One hand pressed against Isolde, the other reaching to slit her stomach. Thaddeus, Miss Aloan risked her life to save 5 people, and now you're doing this. How can you do this to Miss Aloan? Hearing the name Aloan, Thaddeus paused, his hands stilling. I didn't kill anyone, I just wanted her to pay for her actions. Officer Gideon Lockhart saw the look in his eyes and realized he had lost his mind, so he had no choice but to take more forceful measures. Thaddeus, the woman beside you is your wife's younger sister. Your wife is watching from heaven. If you hurt Isolde, she'll be heartbroken. Officer Gideon Lockhart's words sent a wave of emotion through Thaddeus. Aloan is watching from heaven. If he does this, she'll be deeply disappointed and might never want to see him again. Aloan is so kind, she'd never want anyone to be hurt. She sacrificed her heart and body for others. If she were still alive, she would never agree to harm Isolde. Thinking of this, Thaddeus felt completely powerless. However, he still felt unwilling to give up. The woman before him had deceived him with lies and taken everything from Aloan. Even when Aloan died, she didn't even say goodbye to her husband, yet she signed the divorce papers. He felt so bitter inside. Thaddeus gave a cold laugh as tears fell down his face. He raised his hand to attack Isolde but dropped it helplessly. "Don't worry. I won't hurt her anymore," he said. Officer Gideon Lockhart heard this and sighed deeply, his tense nerves finally relaxing. "However," he added, "but there's one more thing I need to do." Thaddeus suddenly raised his head and spoke calmly. At that moment, there was no trace of the madness or murderous intent in his eyes. Officer Gideon Lockhart nodded. "As long as you don't hurt anyone, the rest can be discussed." Thaddeus finally put down the scalpel. Officer Gideon Lockhart saw this and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, immediately afterward, everyone's nerves tensed up again. Thaddeus quickly grabbed Isolde's chin and forced a bottle of an unknown liquid down her throat. No, Isolde tried to speak, but the liquid was forced down her throat. "What did you give me?" she asked fearfully. Thaddeus, however, wore a cold smile on his face. He tossed aside the cup in his hand, watching Isolde vomit in a heap. "Don't worry, it's not poison. It's just an abortion pill. The child in your womb never should have existed. Let it go and apologize to Aloan." Thaddeus looked relaxed, smiling even more broadly. Aloan's face turned pale as she felt a warm flow leaving her body. Her eyes widened in horror as she cried out, "My child?" No, she had hoped this child could inherit the family fortune. The surrounding police officers immediately sprang into action. Without Officer Gideon Lockhart's permission, no one had been allowed to move. Now, seeing the situation before him, Officer Gideon Lockhart couldn't wait to give the order. "Arrest him!" Quickly understood, several police officers rushed over, grabbed Thaddeus's arms, and pinned him heavily to the ground. Thaddeus didn't resist and obediently let the police handcuff him. He knew his goal had been achieved. The child in Isolde's womb could no longer be saved. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but laugh despite being pinned to the ground. Officer Gideon Lockhart frowned and said, "This Thaddeus is truly mad. I wonder what Aloan the martyr would think of this if she were in heaven later." The doctors performed emergency surgery, and Isolde survived, but she lost the fetus and had to undergo a hysterectomy. She would never be able to have children again. Thaddeus heard the news but showed no change in expression. He sat quietly in prison, gazing through the iron bars at the sky outside. No one knew what he was thinking. That night, Thaddeus couldn't fall asleep. In his dream, he finally saw Aloan again, her face as beautiful as ever, and his heart was filled with joy. Aloan stood before him, her face expressionless but her clear eyes fixed on him. "Aloan, you've finally come to see me." Thaddeus rushed forward, eager to get closer to her. But though she was right before him, it seemed as though an insurmountable distance separated them. No matter how he moved, she remained 3 steps away. Suddenly, Thaddeus felt despair wash over him. He knelt down, his heart filled with desperation. "Aloan, please don't leave, if you're willing to come back. If you can forgive me, I'll agree to anything. Even if you ask me to give up everything right now, I won't hesitate. Please don't leave, okay?" However, Aloan simply stared at him in silence, saying nothing. Every night thereafter, Aloan appeared in his dreams, silently watching him, neither approaching nor retreating. No matter how much Thaddeus pleaded, cried, or knelt down to beg, Aloan refused to forgive him. Thaddeus felt utterly exhausted, his head spinning, and his mind growing increasingly chaotic. Days passed in a haze until the prison door suddenly opened. "Thaddeus, someone is here to see you." A man in a suit stood at the door. "Thaddeus, I'm your lawyer. According to your company's request, I have secured parole for you. Please come with me." Thaddeus felt like a puppet without a will, staring blankly as the lawyer spoke, then mechanically signed his name. He felt as though none of this had anything to do with him. After the formalities were completed, the lawyer took him home. The house was so quiet it felt lonely, like an empty grave. He looked at the altar in the living room and smiled gently. "Aloan, I'm back." But no one responded. Thaddeus lay on the bed where Aloan had once slept, filled with anticipation. Would Aloan come to see him tonight? Whether she was silent or angry, as long as she appeared, he would be satisfied. Thaddeus drifted off to sleep. Fortunately, Aloan really came. This time, she was no longer the silent and indifferent person she had been before. Instead, she smiled at Thaddeus, her face adorned with a faint smile. Thaddeus wept bitterly in his dream, his voice filled with sorrow. Aloan, can you forgive me? I truly regret it. It's all my fault. I let you leave and our child is gone. Thaddeus was heartbroken, like a wounded child. Every day since you left. I've been in agony. Aloan, I really miss you. He stared blankly and reached out his hand, wanting to embrace Aloan. But Aloan took a step back and turned to leave. Watching her back, Thaddeus felt uneasy, sensing that this time, Aloan might never return. Aloan, don't go, wait for me. He was so anxious he couldn't help but shout out loud. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of Aloan, and she turned to look at him. Her eyes held sadness but also a sense of relief. In that moment, Thaddeus realized something, and a strong sense of panic surged through him. He ran forward desperately, but he couldn't catch up with her. Finally, Thaddeus knelt down on the ground, crying and begging, Aloan, please don't go. But Aloan walked resolutely into the bright light. Aloan, Thaddeus cried out in shock and woke up from his dream. His forehead covered in sweat. He knew that Aloan was gone and would never return. Thaddeus felt a deep sense of despair. The next morning, he drove to Aloan's grave. On the passenger seat of the car lay her favorite sunflowers. When he arrived at the cemetery, he saw a car parked nearby. Someone had arrived before him. A little girl, accompanied by her parents, was holding flowers and bowing and kowtowing before Aloan's grave. She was the little girl Aloan had rescued from the organ trafficking ring. Aloan, do you know? In this world besides me, there are many others who care about you and are grateful to you. Everything you did was worth it. Thaddeus didn't disturb them but stopped nearby. Watching silently, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness. After the little girl and her family left, Thaddeus approached Aloan with concern. In the photo on the tombstone, Aloan was still smiling happily, as if she had never left. However, Thaddeus remembered that she hadn't smiled like that in a long time. He cleaned Aloan's grave spotlessly and sat by it for a long time, talking to her. Aloan, I really miss you. Without you in this world, everything feels meaningless to me. Aloan, let's be together again in our next life. Okay, in our next life? You must live well. I will make up for everything I owe you in this life 100-fold. 1,000-fold. Thaddeus gently kissed the photo on Aloan's tombstone before reluctantly getting up and leaving. However, after driving some distance, he noticed something unusual ahead. Looking closely, he saw a car overturned by the roadside, with debris from other vehicles scattered around it. Black smoke was billowing from the car, and bloodstains were visible on the shattered windows. This was the car belonging to the little girl's family. They had been in an accident. He immediately slammed on the brakes, opened the door, and ran toward the accident scene. Wake up, Thaddeus struggled to open the front door, slapped the couple's faces, but found they were both unconscious. A faint moan came from the back seat. Thaddeus turned around, opened the door next to her, and pulled the little girl out. The little girl was covered in blood, trembling in pain, but she was still worried about her parents. Uncle, please, save my mom and dad. The girl refused to leave because she couldn't find her parents. Thaddeus had no choice but to carry her to the grass nearby. He called an ambulance and handed the phone to the little girl. Be good. Tell the doctor what happened. I'll go save your parents right away. Thaddeus gently stroked the little girl's head, his voice firm. They'll be okay? The car door was deformed from the impact. Thaddeus struggled to pull the two people in the front seats out. He moved the couple to a safer spot and waited for the ambulance to arrive. But just then, an odd sound came from the car, sounding like something was catching fire. This is bad, something's going to happen. Thaddeus's heart sank. He clenched his teeth, quickly picked up the little girl who was closest to the car, and ran toward a safe place. Boom! At that moment, a loud explosion echoed behind him. He quickly used his body to shield the little girl beneath him. Aloan, the person you risked your life to save, I will not let anything happen to her. A sharp pain swept through him, and Thaddeus' vision went black as he fell into endless darkness. Since Aloan's death, Thaddeus' heart had also died, leaving him nothing but an empty shell in this world. Now he finally had the chance to meet Aloan again. Thaddeus's lips curled into a faint smile, but a tear rolled down his cheek. Aloan, I'm here. Just like the Aloan in his dreams, a beam of light appeared not far from him. In the glow, Aloan's figure seemed slightly blurred. Aloan, wait for me, Thaddeus shouted joyfully and rushed toward Aloan.